The purpose of this hearing is that the issue we're going to be discussing is of enormous consequence, but unfortunately, I don't think it's getting the attention that it deserves. I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here, and I look forward to a good and serious discussion. Let me start off by saying that as a nation, we have more income and wealth inequality today than we've ever had in the history of America. While the billionaire class becomes wealthier, our social safety net for the most vulnerable in our country remains far behind other wealthy nations. It's a disaster, and if we do not get our act together, it's only going to get worse. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major nation. Our child care system is now dysfunctional. More than 600,000 fellow Americans are homeless, and over 85 million are uninsured or underinsured. But let's be clear. It's not just the children and the poor who in the richest country on earth are hurting. Our nation's senior citizens are struggling as well. The truth is that we now have a retirement crisis in America that demands our immediate attention, which brings us to the subject of today's hearing. In the United States today, almost 45% of older Americans between the ages of 55 and 64 have no savings at all and no idea how they will retire with any shred of dignity or respect. 45% of workers between 55 and 64, zero retirement savings. And as frightening as the retirement crisis is for older workers, it is even a bigger concern for the millions of senior citizens who are no longer able to work, who have exhausted all of their savings, and who have no pensions at all. Incredibly, and this really is quite incredible, 1 out of every 4 senior citizens in America are trying to live on an income of less than $15,000 a year. Think about that. While over half of our nation's seniors are trying to survive on an income of less than $30,000 a year. Just put yourself in the place of that person. How do you pay the rent? How do you pay for health care and prescription drugs? How do you put food on the table on just $15,000 or even $30,000 a year? And the truth of the matter is that many cannot. That should not be happening in our country. According to the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, we now have the dubious distinction of not only having one of the highest rates of childhood poverty in the industrialized world for our children, we also have one of the highest rates of senior poverty compared to other wealthy nations as well. In Denmark, only 3% of seniors live in poverty. In France, 4.4%. The United Kingdom, 15.5%. But in America, over 23% of seniors are living in poverty. I would hope that we would agree that that is simply unacceptable and that's got to change. 50 years ago, it was not uncommon for corporations to provide workers with a defined benefit pension plan that guaranteed a monthly income in retirement. Back then, many corporations made a promise to their workers. If they worked at the same company for a reasonable period of time, they would be rewarded with a monthly check that would enable them to live comfortably in retirement. Not a radical idea. That's what it was then. The longer you worked at the same company, the bigger your retirement check would be. And the employer would bear, in those days, all of the responsibility to fund the pensions of their workforce. Sadly, tragically, those days are mostly behind us. As a result of a relentless 40-year war on the working class, waged by corporate America, traditional pension plans have become an endangered species on their way to extinction. And the result for workers has been tragic. In 1983, 31% of American workers were at risk of not being able to maintain their standard of living in old age. In 2020, that number rose to 51%. In other words, we are moving in exactly the wrong direction. All right, that's the problem. What do we do to address that crisis? First, at a time when far too many seniors are living in poverty and many have nothing in the bank for retirement, We must expand Social Security, not cut Social Security, as many of my colleagues in Congress would have us do. And we must make Social Security solvent for the next 75 years, so it'll be there for our kids and our grandchildren. Legislation that I have introduced, along with 9 co-sponsors, accomplishes those goals. According to the Social Security Administration, the legislation that I've introduced would make Social Security solvent for 75 years and increase benefits by $2,400 a year for seniors who need them. How do you do that? My goodness. How do you do that? Well, at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, we have the radical idea that maybe the people on top should start paying their fair share of taxes. Today, a billionaire pays the same amount of money into Social Security as somebody who makes $168,000 a year as a result of the cap on the Social Security payroll tax. Got that? You make $1 billion a year, you make $168,000 a year, you pay the same amount. Anybody in America think that makes sense? I don't. The legislation we have proposed would lift the cap on Social Security starting at $200,000. You do that, tax all income, Social Security is solvent for the next 75 years, increase benefits by $2,400 per person. But that's not all that we have to do. In my view, every corporation in America should be required to provide a retirement plan for their workers. And if corporations choose not to offer a retirement plan, they must give workers the option of contributing to a federal pension plan similar, guess what, to what members of Congress have. How's that? Good for Congress, good for the American people. Today, federal employees and members of Congress have a certain percentage of their salaries deducted from their paychecks and put into the FERS program that provides a pension based on salary and years of service. Bottom line, if it is good for members of Congress, our staff, it's good for the American people. That's where we are. We got a crisis. I think we have some common sense solutions, and I look forward to working with members of this committee to address them. Senator Cassidy, Mike is yours.
Thank you, Chair Sanders. A little odd. The focus today seems to be promoting the defined benefits system, prescribing an agenda, frankly, that is outdated and little disconnected. In 1974, Congress passed the Employment Retirement Income Security Act, the ERISA Act, in response to tens of thousands of Americans losing their retirement security because their employer's defined benefit system failed. Exemplified by the collapse of Studebaker Automobile Company and about 1,800 other pension plans terminating over a 4-year period, imagine the impact upon those hundreds of thousands of workers who were employed by them. Since ERISA, the defined benefit system has been largely replaced by the defined contribution, which has flourished. As of 2021, 146 million Americans collectively own $9.5 trillion in retirement assets. Now, the advantage of the defined contribution system, why many have flocked to it, is that workers own their own retirement system. No matter what happens to the worker's current or previous employer, their retirement funds are secure. Very few people now retire after 50 years at a company and get a golden watch. Most will move between employers. This allows them to do so while maintaining their retirement fund. Importantly, Congress just passed Secure Act 2.0 on a bipartisan basis, making improvements to our nation's retirement system. We had the option to take the one such as the chair is advocating for, and on a bipartisan basis chose not to. Instead, based the solution primarily on the success of the defined contribution system. Secure 2.0 was so popular, it passed out of all 4 committees of jurisdiction with unanimous votes, and on the House floor, can you imagine this, by a vote of 414 to 5. The chair speaks of needing to find a solution to a crisis, but we have that solution. By the way, there are still provisions of Secure Act 2.0 that have yet to be implemented, including those helping low-income individuals. For example, the Enhanced Savers Match, a tax credit going right into low-income Americans' retirement accounts, which goes into effect in 2027. The chair has referenced statistics pointing to a retirement crisis, but many of these are from 2021, which predate the passage of Secure 2.0. the improvements it has made and the improvements that it will make, especially those targeting lower-income Americans. Now, by the way, there is a place for defined benefit systems. With reforms, it can be successful. In 2006, we passed these needed reforms, which resulted in some of those funds now being overfunded, even weathering the 2009 financial crisis. However, these reforms have not been implemented in the largely union-utilized multi-employer defined benefit space. Many of these multi-employer defined benefit plans have struggled for years when in 2021 they told Congress they needed a bailout. Many of the plans were badly mismanaged. Democrats passed a $90 billion bailout of the multi-employer defined benefit system on a party line vote without strings on the tax dollars to prevent, strings that would say you have to make these reforms to prevent future failures. Now, this lack of reform system is that which some wish us to expand. Unfortunately, the large labor union successfully lobbied to make sure the bailout did not come with any meaningful reforms protecting workers and preventing future failure. Simple reforms, like requiring certain funding levels, disclosures for defined benefit plans, requiring unions to provide beneficiaries with a clear report of their defined benefit program's financial state. Now we're seeing the results of the failure to enact these provisions. The Central States Pension Fund received $127 million overpayment in their bailout because they included thousands of deceased participants in their bailout application. Let me give credit where credit is due. Teamster President Sean O'Brien told this committee the money should be repaid. However, the Central State Pension Fund now tells the committee it would be impossible for them to repay the money that they were improperly paid. Workers covered by the Central State should be alarmed about the financial state of their retirement plan if returning money they weren't supposed to receive would destabilize the fund now. Frankly, it's infuriating to hear that the union's pension plan could be on the verge of collapse only a few years after they received tens of billions of dollars to bail. If the chair truly wishes to expand the use of defined benefit plans, I am so happy to discuss reforms similar to the ones that have been very successful in the individual employer space and pass them to stabilize the entire defined benefit system. But we'll have to overcome staunch union opposition to any reform that provides greater oversight and protection for their workers. Together, though, I think we could do it. To be clear, Republicans do not support putting the thumb on the scale to prefer either defined benefit or defined contribution. We support what works. Most businesses with individual employer defined benefit plans wish to continue to offer and expand their programs. If it's working, don't fix it. We're seeing the good work of companies who are importing the best of defined benefit system into the defined contribution, including many innovative lifetime income products. I agree with the chair that lifetime income is desired by many Americans. Let's make it easier for the defined contribution to include them. There are things we can do on a bipartisan basis, which is why it was disappointing that rather working together to hold a bipartisan hearing, the majority planned this hearing on a partisan basis with no input from the minority on scope or legislative focus. We will need something bipartisan to pass with 60 votes. We can do it. Earlier this year, Senator Kaine and I introduced two bipartisan bills. The Helping Young Americans Save for Retirement Act makes it easier for younger workers between the ages of 18 and 20 to save for retirement by removing barriers currently making it harder to join an employer's retirement plan. The Auto Enroll Act of 2023 assists workers who previously declined to participate or contributed little to the employer's pension plan. Many workers earlier in their career make less money. They want the money in their paycheck to pay for bills as opposed to contributing to retirement. But when their wages grow, we find they forget to opt back in to start contributing to their retirement. This legislation allows the business to periodically auto-enroll employees back into their plans with the option to opt out, but that way they don't accidentally miss out on crucial years preparing for retirement. I hope the chair will indulge us with a markup of these bipartisan pieces of legislation. In closing, many other members of this committee had wonderful ideas that were included in the Secure 2.0. It would be great to explore the current effectiveness of these provisions and discuss any other creative ideas that enhance the system we have. Thank you, and I yield.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy. We have 5 excellent, knowledgeable witnesses. We're going to begin with Sarah Chambers. Ms. Chambers is a fourth-generation Ford auto worker and has been a UAW member for 17 years. She spent her first 6 years as a full-time
Thank you.
temporary employee at a Ford subsidiary in Plymouth, Michigan. In 2012, to secure permanent status and support her family, Sarah was forced to move from Michigan to Ford's Louisville assembly plant in Kentucky. She now works at Ford's Livonia transmission plant in Michigan as a member of the UAW Local 182. Ms. Chambers, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you, and good morning. As Senator Sanders said, my name's Sarah Chambers. I'm a proud fourth-generation auto worker. I followed in my great-grandfather's, my grandparents', and my mother's footsteps. I build cars for a living, and I'm proud of the work that I've done. But the difference between my generation and past generations is they had a pension. I do not. I don't have health care when I retire, and I do not have retirement security. I've been an auto worker for 17 years. 6 of those years I worked at Ford as a full-time temporary employee until 2012. That was a big moment for me, because for generations, getting a job at Ford meant stability and security. It meant being able to plan for yourself and your children. It meant being able to buy a house and see a future for yourself. But for those of us that hired in after the financial crisis, that has not been our truth. Instead, we have been fighting to get back the American dream and try to turn these jobs back into careers, just like they were when my parents and grandparents who built this country and the American auto industry. 2 of my grandparents who retired from the Big Three had very different paths. My grandfather gave 3 decades to Ford Motor Company, and in return, he got to retire at age 55 with a pension and health care. He was afforded the dignity to have a life after Ford Motor Company. He was able to have a life with his kids, his grandchildren, and his great-grandchildren, be a part of his community, and not just work until he died. My grandmother, she had a different path. She was hit with Lou Gehrig's disease. She had to retire early for her illness. She didn't have to choose between doctors, rent, or food. She knew she had health care and a pension to rely on as she retired and struggled through her health. For me, in sickness or in health, I don't know what my future holds. It causes fear and anxiety in the working people that don't know how long they're going to be able to last at a job. It makes people say, maybe I won't buy that house, maybe I won't put down roots in this community, or maybe I won't stay at this company. I didn't become a fourth-generation auto worker because I love building cars. I didn't become a fourth-generation auto worker because I love the low starting pay or the lack of a retirement security that we now know. I come from a family of auto workers because for years it was a career, one that you would put work in and get something out of it. In a lot of ways, for generations, Ford was the American dream. It meant if I pitched in, if I worked hard, I'd be able to have a life after Ford Motor Company. But without a pension, without health care, we have people leaving these companies after 30 years with nothing more than a have a nice day, and I hope the stock market doesn't crash. That is unacceptable for America. As you know, the UAW won major victories in our 6-week strike. I am proud of the accomplishments that we've made after 15 years of falling behind after the financial crisis. But we still fell short of what generations of auto workers had. We still fell short of what the American dream should be. The companies were adamant that they couldn't afford to add to our pension liability. They said that Wall Street would look down on them and that giving back our pensions could affect their stock prices and possibly lead to lower credit ratings. Nowadays, a stock price is more important than 150,000 auto workers. That's a shame. Our next big 3 contracts expire in 2028, and we are ready to fight like hell for retirement security, for pensions, and health care when I retire. There's an old saying, we'll strike if provoked. Well, I think that Wall Street calling the shots and telling the big 3 that auto workers can't have retirement security, that's what I call being provoked. There's another old saying, Which side are you on? So I want to close by asking you, our U.S. senators who represent us, which side are you on? The American workers who elect you, or corporate greed in Wall Street, who say a dignified retirement is too much for the American people to ask for? Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chambers. Our next witness will be Teresa Ghilarducci, who is a professor of economics at the New School in New York City. She has frequently published in economic journals and has authored several books on how we can ensure retirement security for all American workers. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you, Senator. Because of an inadequate pension system in the United States, the U.S. elder poverty rate... Says talk, sorry. Because of an inadequate pension system in the United States, our elder poverty rate exceeds all of our peers. We are the highest at 23%. In contrast, the poverty risk for Dutch elders is a very low 3%. The U.S. retirement system gets C's and D's on international benchmarks, and the Dutch system gets an A. You might hear about the average retirement wealth being quite high and actually growing. But for the typical American, the median retirement wealth has gone down for the bottom 90%. Because averages don't tell the story, distribution does. If Elon Musk walked on the witness stand today, we would be the richest, on average, witnesses of all time in the Help Committee. But the typical retirement wealth for us would not go up. For the typical American approaching retirement, and my study looks at the elder households and their typical retirement wealth, the Social Security wealth is the most important. The stream of Social Security benefits, a defined benefit system, for those in the bottom half of the wealth distribution is worth about $188,000. But they have zero retirement wealth and zero home equity. For the typical household in the next 40%, the middle class, their retirement wealth is only about $20,000, and we have about $129,000 in home equity. It's only the top 10% who, over the past 30 years, have had rapid increase in their retirement wealth, their health as well, and their home equity exceeds 4 times that of the middle class. This all adds up into a lack of retirement readiness. And that lack of retirement readiness has materialized even though Congress has given lots of tax breaks for retirement savings. There are a lot of other pro-savings policies like homeowning incentives. There have been soaring tax breaks for savings. And there's been lots of substantial investments into financial advice and all sorts of retirement products. The U.S. retirement system has not flourished. It lacks 3 fundamental elements of a well-designed pension system. A well-designed pension system only needs 3 things. It needs to help all Americans accumulate enough money into their retirement accounts. It needs to help all Americans invest well into their retirement accounts. It needs to have a good way for Americans to deaccumulate their retirement accounts and lifetime benefits. So what is to be done? Well, senators here have tried to protect the defined benefit system. Senators Cassidy and Kane would mandate that ERISA plans let people into these plans earlier, at 18, not at 21. Your Auto Re-enrollment Act would help reinvigorate these auto enrollment provisions to help more participation. And you may hear about auto IRAs. These are automatic individual retirement accounts. They're at the state level and at the federal level. They're good baby steps for more access, but IRAs permit leakages, and they do not pool investments. And because people access their individual retirement accounts for emergency savings, home ownership, and other life events, they should be called individual emergency savings accounts. They're not retirement accounts. But we can extend wealth-building opportunities to all Americans. And one bipartisan, powerful proposal already exists. Senator Hickenlooper, along with Senator Tillis, Republican, Democrat, and also a Democrat and a Republican in the House, Representatives Terry Sewell and Lloyd Schmucker, would expand retirement accounts to all public sector workers who don't have one. They do not crowd out existing accounts. It follows the successful thrift savings plan, again, the savings plan for the staff members of Congress and for members of Congress. It would feature automatic enrollment. It would feature portability, have good investment options, and sensible deaccumulation. It meets that three-pronged test. And there's also a 5% match, which helps mitigate the top-heaviness of our current match. It's endorsed by experts all across the political spectrum, the AARP to Charles Schwab. Last week, I was on a radio talk show, and the 25-year-old NPR host asked me, why, Professor, is retirement in America becoming a luxury? My students ask me every semester, why do so many people in America who are old, why are they poor or why do they have to work? I congratulate committee members from both parties for recognizing the urgency, the disaster, and the crisis, and for your caring and your wisdom to solve it. I heard you all say that you need a bold bipartisan reform. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next witness will be Dan Doonan, who is the Executive Director of the National Institute on Retirement Security. He has more than 20 years of experience working on retirement issues. Mr. Doonan, thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you. Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Cassidy, and members of the Senate Help Committee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify on the state of retirement in the United States and the role of defined benefit pensions in delivering retirement security. I'm Dan Doonan, Executive Director of NERS, and we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank in Washington, D.C., and we have a broad membership base, financial service companies, plan sponsors, labor unions, and nonprofits, including AARP. Congress has made progress to address America's retirement crisis. The Secure Act and Secure Act 2.0 were steps in the right direction. However, much work remains to ensure that Americans can be self-sufficient in retirement. The key points I'd like to make today are, first, Americans do face an alarming retirement savings shortfall. Second, the move away from pensions is a major culprit in the nation's retirement crisis. While 401k plans are an important part of the retirement equation, they were just not designed to replace pensions. And third, today's pension designs and management can be beneficial for employers, workers, and the economy more broadly. Pensions are the most economically efficient way to deliver retirement income, and they offer workforce advantages to employers. Pensions paid out more than $600 billion in 2020, supporting $1.3 trillion in economic activity. And pensions, of course, are user-friendly for workers and face little leakage. In the past, the biggest challenge has been for employers that costs have been unstable. But today, there are more sophisticated tools and benefit designs that have addressed this challenge. I believe that if companies give pensions a fresh look, they will discover that win-win solutions are possible. Diving a little deeper into the gravity of the U.S. retirement problem, the data clearly shows most Americans will not have enough money for financially secure retirement, and they are worried about it. Our Generation X research found that the bottom half of Gen X earners only had a few $1,000s saved for retirement. And the median household, not individuals, but household, has only $40,000 in retirement savings. Also, retirement savings for Gen X are highly concentrated amongst the highest earners. More broadly, the National Retirement Risk Index finds that half of U.S. households will not be able to maintain their standard of living when they retire. Americans understand the scope of this crisis. 79% of Americans agree there's a retirement crisis, with 55% concerned that they cannot achieve financial security in retirement. Looking ahead, the burden of preparing for retirement increases as we live longer, face large risks without risk pooling, and deal with rising costs. Research shows that the nation's individual savings-based system is not well suited for workers. It's important to note 401ks were never meant to replace pensions. They were meant to be a supplemental vehicle. Conventional wisdom suggests that 401ks cost less, but I think what I hear when that is said, it means we're putting less money into a less efficient system, and as costs rise, and hoping for the best. Post-retirement brings the biggest challenges and inefficiencies. Our new research asks, how much retirement income could a $100,000 nest egg generate annually for someone at age 65? The responses were jarring. Only 8% of workers provided an accurate response. Most wildly overestimated the level of income they could count on. Third, many assume that pensions have similar benefit designs, and nothing could be further from the truth. Two public plans provide an example and are very transparent in their operations. The Wisconsin retirement system and the South Dakota retirement system. My written comments provide a chart showing the remarkable cost stability of these systems throughout volatile times. Fourth, the ground is shifting with respect to the employers offering pensions. We've heard about the interest at UAW to return to pensions, and we've all read the news about IBM moving back to pensions, which actually produces substantial cash savings for IBM as well. Finally, my written testimony details policy issues that could help facilitate a pension renaissance. These key issues are about enabling companies to employ fiscally cautious funding strategies that reduce cost volatility over time without a major disincentive to err on the safe side. In conclusion, thank you for holding this important hearing and the opportunity to testify. I'll be happy to respond to questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donovan. Senator Cassidy, you want to introduce your witness?
Yes, please. My pleasure to introduce Rachel Gressler, a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation's Rowe Institute, whose work focuses on retirement and labor policies that promote economic growth, individual freedom, and well-being. Before joining Heritage, Ms. Gressler was a senior economist for the United States Congressional Joint Economic Committee. She holds a BA in economics from the University of Mary Washington, as well as a master's degree in public policy and economics from Georgetown. Welcome, Ms. Gressler. We appreciate you being here and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. In my testimony, I would like to look at the current state of Americans' retirement security and also discuss the failure of certain defined benefit pensions. Older Americans' financial well-being is strong by historic standards. The share of older Americans with no retirement savings fell to 12% in 2022. Even after excessive inflation has eaten away at the value of American savings, retirees' real incomes are up over 30% over the past 35 years. Importantly, the lowest earners have the highest replacement rates in retirement. Households in the bottom 20% average 123% of their pre-retirement incomes, whereas households at the top average 75%. Older Americans report greater financial well-being than any other age group, and over the past 10 years, the percentage of people over 65 who say that they are just getting by or having a hard time getting by fell by half. As retirement savings have shifted from defined benefit to defined contribution plans, assets have surged. At $41.5 trillion, Americans' inflation-adjusted retirement assets have increased 330% over the last 35 years. Defined benefit and defined contribution plans can provide secure retirement. But when not managed properly, defined benefit plans can end up like Ponzi schemes. That's what's happened with Social Security and multi-employer or union pensions. Past and current Congresses have failed to properly manage Social Security and failed to require sound funding rules for union pensions. Now, neither can come close to providing retirees what they have promised. Social Security will be insolvent in 9 years and will implement 23% across-the-board benefit cuts. That's a $5,300 per year cut for the average retiree. Now, a program that was supposed to prevent younger generations from having to bear the burden of older generations has instead amassed a $22.4 trillion unfunded obligation. That amounts to $172,000 for every household in America. Simply maintaining current benefits would require the average household to pay at least $3,000 more per year in taxes. That money would be far better off in a personal account. My analysis shows that if the younger worker today were allowed to put their Social Security taxes into a personal account, they would have 3 times as much in retirement after purchasing an annuity. Policymakers must reform Social Security before it becomes an even worse deal for younger workers. By shifting towards a universal benefit and making other common sense changes, policymakers can improve the program, increase economic growth, and enable greater personal savings. Private union pension plans are an even worse disaster than Social Security. Multi-employer pension funding has $823 billion in unfunded obligations as of 2021 and 41 cents on the dollar in promised benefits. This underfunding is systemic. 96% of participants are in a plan that is less than 60% funded. This happened because unions took advantage of preferential rules that allowed them to increase benefits without requiring higher contributions to fund those benefits. Yet, instead of fixing the broken multi-employer system, Congress passed the worst possible type of bailout, one that picks winners and losers, does absolutely nothing to fix the root problems, and which encourages more recklessness. While roughly 15% of union plans are now privy to taxpayer bailouts, about 10 million workers are in plans that won't receive bailouts and that will still become insolvent. To prevent union workers and retirees from receiving less than half of their promised benefits and to prevent taxpayers from having to pay another $700 billion in bailouts, Congress must shore up the PBGC and apply the same funding rules to union pensions as it does to non-union pensions. Social Security and union pensions are anything but secure. The last thing that Americans need is for lawmakers to try to put more of their retirement savings into accounts that they neither own nor control, and which are managed by groups of people who've repeatedly put their own personal incentives above workers' and retirees' well-being. To help improve the financial security of all Americans, including younger workers who face the greatest financial struggles today, policymakers should enact universal savings accounts so that it's simpler and easier for Americans to save for all types of expected and unexpected life events. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
First, Ms. Gressler, you almost nailed your 5 minutes. Let me just compliment you. Now I have the pleasure to introduce Mr. Eric Stevenson, the President of Retirement Solutions at Nationwide, bringing more than 17 years of experience, having joined Nationwide in 2006. He holds his Bachelor of Business Administration and Finance from the University of Oklahoma and Master's of Business Administration degree from Northwestern University. He's responsible for overseeing Nationwide's retirement plans operation and for delivering workplace solutions for plan sponsors and participants. Mr. Stevenson, welcome back to the U.S. Senate, and thank you for being here.
Well, good morning, and Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Cassidy, and members of the committee, thank you for convening today's hearing to discuss the nation's retirement system and how we can better meet the needs of America's workers and retirees. As was mentioned, my name is Eric Stevenson. I'm president of Nationwide Retirement Solutions at Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company, a Fortune 100 company based in Columbus, Ohio. We provide a full range of insurance and financial services products. Nationwide administers 26,000 retirement plans, protecting nearly $200 billion in participant assets and helping to secure financial futures for over 2.5 million participants. We're the top provider of governmental 457 retirement plans with 7,600 plans serving 1.84 million workers. We also focus on helping small business employees where the average plan size is 40 employees or less through nearly 25,000 401k plans in that space. When Nationwide began the retirement solutions business back in 1973, it was a very different landscape than we see today. Employers offering pensions took on the risk and the burden of managing that asset on behalf of their employees, most of whom would work for that employer for their entire career before retiring with their benefits. By 1975, there were 2 defined contribution plans for every 1 defined benefit plan in the market. The burden of managing retirement assets began to shift onto the shoulders of the retirement saver and away from the employer of the plan sponsor. While neither of these solutions on their own was perfect, traditional DBs kept employees tied with their employer through vesting requirements and service-based benefit calculations. DC plans expected average employees to have the knowledge and the confidence to manage their own investment choices with little support. But both systems had significant upsides. Traditional DBs offer the security of a predictable and reliable income stream throughout retirement, often including some survivor benefits too. DC plans were portable and could be moved with the worker from job to job as they search for higher pay and new opportunities. Now, in 2024, we have the ability to take the best of both systems and move past their less desirable features. The successful passage of Secure Act of 2019 and Secure Act 2.0 of 2022 created opportunities to innovate and improve the plans and offerings that didn't previously exist. Today's DC plans come with a host of education, support, and financial planning tools. There are tax incentives to encourage small businesses to offer plans to employees and to make employer contributions to their savings. Student loan matching helps young savers start early. Auto-enroll features get more and more workers saving for retirement. Most importantly, plans can now easily integrate protected retirement income into employer-sponsored plans. Workers with access to these products can select to invest in them, knowing what their guaranteed income will be upon retirement. Nationwide has dedicated significant resources to build out a comprehensive suite of products on our platform to specifically meet these needs. Encouraging plan sponsors to offer at least one protected retirement income solution in their plans will go a long way in making sure that people have guaranteed income when they retire. With 2024 represents 4.4 million Americans are going to turn 65, the largest number in our history. That's 12,000 people are turning 65 a day. With that kind of trend, I am especially energized to be here today with all of you seeking the same goal of a secure retirement for America's workers, and I look forward to your questions as we look for ways to solve this crisis.
Thank you very much. Now we'll begin with the questioning. You know, at hearings like this, experts throw out a lot of numbers, and I look at the world a little bit differently than some of our conservative economists in terms of what's happening to working families. But at the end of the day, you got millions and millions of people who have worked their whole lives, are entering retirement, and they're scared to death. And I think, Ms. Chambers, your testimony was extremely moving, because I think you're not just speaking about your own life, or not even about the UAW and union members. You're talking about millions and millions of people. Talk a little bit, not only for your own experience, from your friends, your family, what it's like to have worked, in your case, 17 years for one of the major corporations in America, and as I understand it right now, you have no retirement program, no pension program. On an emotional basis, on a personal basis, what is that like?
So, yeah, we have a 401k, and we got a raise in our 401k, and it's great. It's a good stepping stone. It's a good foot forward. But when I retire, my 401k is based off, and the rest of America now that's in my generation, is based off of what the stock market's doing. I've seen several times in my lifetime where the stock markets went down, and we've lost a lot of money in our 401k. I'm not at retirement age, but when I look at my 401k and the amount of money that was bleeding out of it with the COVID, it makes me very uneasy. It kind of feels like, especially working at Ford, I had a goal post when I first hired in, and then it was, well, you're a temporary employee full-time until further notice. So then now I'm...
Explain to members what being a quote-unquote temporary, you were a temporary employee for 6 years, right?
Yep.
It's a long
Yes.
temp. What does that mean?
So I was considered full-time, so I worked 40, 50, 60 hours a week, but I was locked in at $14 an hour until 2013. And I was expected to do everything a full-time employee did, but I didn't get any of the benefits. And that actually, when I hired in, I questioned what parts of the contract I fell under, and they said, it depends on what we're talking about. So there was never any full, like, here's your book, this is your rules and regulations. It's like, no, we're not going to cover you under that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Ghilarducci, we are, in one sense, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, right? You got a lot of billionaires out there doing very, very well. How does, in your judgment, the American retirement plan, the status of older Americans compared to people around other wealthy nations?
Yeah,
Microphone.
my data really looks at that question. So I compare what people were like when they were approaching retirement 30 years ago, and then take the same snapshot of the generation that looks like them right now. And as I said in my written testimony today, 50% will not be able to meet their retirement standards, and most of them won't be able to meet poverty standard. Compare that to other countries with all different kinds of systems, the Scandinavians, the Germans, the French, even the Italians. Just look at our peers, and we fall way behind. I was looking at the elderly poverty rates. Kazakhstan does better than us. So there's a couple of design issues.
I heard from some of the economists here today that we're doing just great. Things are getting better. Is that
Yeah, so that was my little lesson on averages versus medians. Because the rich have done so well, they have brought up those averages that people who talk about average retirement wealth can point to. It's gone up. But that's because the top 10% got the benefit of retirement tax cuts. They got the benefit of the run-up in the market. They didn't take money out, to buy their houses.
Okay, last question. Thank you very much. Sorry. Mr. Doonan, right now, billionaire pays Social Security taxes on $168,000. That's about it. Massive amounts of untaxed money there despite massive income and wealth inequality. That makes sense to you?
Thank you for the question.
Microphone.
Thank you for the question. I would note that one of the reasons Social Security's financing fell off track is we used to capture 90% of total income, and that was sort of expected to continue. But with rising inequality, I think we're down to about 82 or 81. When these projections were done in the early 80s, I feel like they did a pretty nice job. We had 40 years of level costs. But there are some areas where the projections just didn't come true.
Senator Cassidy?
I will defer to Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having this. This is interesting. And we all know that, as Mr. Stevenson said, a lot of us are retiring. I retired a few years ago, and then my wife told me to get me a damn job. So here I am today. I've for 40 years paid max in Social Security, max, and probably paid close to $1 million in Social Security. And I think I get about $3,000 a month, maybe. And by the way, Social Security, for those of you who don't know, this group up here in 1983 voted to tax Social Security. And then a few years later, tax it again. It's all a scam. This is all a scam. I mean, we got people that's getting ready to retire that's going to try to live off $2,000 to $3,000. Impossible. It's impossible. Because what happens, it comes up here, we spend it. We're $35 trillion in debt. We don't have any money. We're dead broke. And then taxpayers have $2 trillion in credit card debt. We are in huge trouble. In this body, we had better start figuring that out, because we're going to have a run on this city here soon, and there's going to be about 150 million people coming up here saying, where's our damn money that we paid in? I could have put my Social Security money, 40 years, in tax, in the market, and probably be worth 8 to 10 million today. But the federal government wasted it. So I'll get off my horse there. But it's good that we have this, because we got, I get a pension check from education. I was part of a union. It's not going to help people. People are going to have to work, continue to work longer and longer. Am I right, Ms. Gender? Can you say something about Social Security and it being taxed for some reason? We're taxing people for the second time on Social Security that they put into an account.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out when Social Security was first founded, those who established it, it was started out as a 2% tax, and they said this will never take more than 6% of your income. Today it takes 12.4%, and depending on whether you go with CBO or Social Security trustees, it needs to take between 15.8 and 17.5%. So we're talking about thousands of dollars more per year. It also was actually only originally recommended that the tax be up to $66,000, equivalent in today's dollars of earnings. But over time, it has expanded massively, and the money has been spent every year. So whereas everybody thinks this money's been set aside for me, no, for the past 13 years, every dollar that has gone out of workers' paychecks has gone immediately to pay promised benefits. And that's what happens when you have a system that enables those in charge of it to spend the money in the immediate term and leave the buck to the next generation that's coming along. And because Social Security has grown so much, it's actually to the detriment of lower income workers in particular, who have to pay such a large share of their paycheck to Social Security. They have little left to save for retirement, and then lower income and African American workers have the lowest life expectancies. So they are the most likely to get nothing back in return. 1 out of 4 African American men will die between the ages of 45 and 64 after having paid into this system for decades, tens if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they might get nothing back.
What's the solution?
I think we ultimately have to shift towards a universal benefit system. That's what true social insurance is. It does not make sense that we are paying the biggest benefits to the highest income earners. So gradually over time, I think we need to bend down the benefits for the middle and upper income earners, actually increase them for the lower income earners. Look at things like indexing retirement age to life expectancy, more accurate inflation index. And I think that workers need an option to have their money in something that actually earns a positive rate of return and that can't just immediately be spent by Congress.
I have a 28 and 29-year-old, 2 boys, got a job, working hard, paying Social Security. They ask me all the time, Dad, will I ever see any of that money? Will they see it?
I think they will see some of it. That's the exact same thing I hear whenever I ask a group of younger workers, and none of them raises their hand. So I think that there will be something there, but it's not going to be what has been promised.
Mr. Stevens, you got anything to add to that?
Thank you, Senator. What I would add is when we talk about Social Security or we talk about pensions, the two things that they both have in common is that guaranteed income. You know what you're going to get, generally speaking, at the end of it. What I reference in terms of protected retirement, we have developed now solutions that get at both of those in a very efficient way, and they also address the issue around market volatility because we have step-ups and lock-ins, and it's a very efficient way to deliver that to millions of Americans that we've been talking, and that's all because of what you all did around Secure Act 1.0 and 2.0. They have put us in a position to do that, and that's why I'm really encouraging us to have every 401k plan, 457 plan, 403b plan at least one of those solutions so that the American workers can choose. If they want to know what they're going to get in retirement, we can deliver that for them.
Young people of all ages ask me, why can't we put our money in our own 401k instead of put it in Social Security? Is there an answer to that?
I think what I love is that they're asking the right question. Savings in any way is a good thing, and I think there's a place for Social Security, there's a place for pensions, and there's certainly a place for what we're doing in 401k plans.
Thank you.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to you and the ranking member for having this hearing, and thanks to all of our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Stevenson, I want to start with a question for you. We can increase Americans' retirement savings by supporting small businesses that offer retirement plans to their employees. That's why my colleague on this committee, Senator Budd, and I are working to develop a bipartisan bill to improve the existing retirement plan startup tax credit. This bill would ensure that the smallest businesses receive tax cuts that fully cover the cost of starting a retirement plan. Mr. Stevenson, how can expanding retirement-related tax incentives for small businesses help increase access to retirement security for their workers? And how can Congress continue to support small businesses in their efforts to provide retirement plans?
Yeah, the credits for small businesses are really important. Everything that we can do to encourage a small business to start a 401k plan is hugely successful. What I would add is, as a former small business owner myself, one of the things when you start a small business that you're struggling with is just there's so many things that you're wrestling with, and sometimes getting to that part, you're just trying to make sure you can make payroll. So making it easy, making it just really automatic for people to set up those 401k plans is super important as well.
Thank you. Another question for you, Mr. Stevenson. Since 2019, Congress has twice passed into law bipartisan legislation to increase access to retirement savings options, particularly for military spouses, part-time workers, and student loan borrowers. However, 57 million Americans still do not have access to a workplace retirement plan. Mr. Stevenson, how can Congress continue to build on this bipartisan momentum to increase access to retirement options?
Yeah, again, Secure Act 1.0 and 2.0 have just huge in terms of momentum and what they've done to create more access. I think we're on the right track. What we need to do now and hold us accountable in terms of on this side of the table is we've got to make sure that people are taking advantage of those benefits that you've already provided, that they're utilizing those. There's a lot out there. 2.0 just passed, and we're working on that. But I think you're on the right track. We've done so much, and we've just got to keep pushing down that path.
Well, and it will be helpful for us to understand as 2.0 is getting implemented what challenges we're seeing and what other changes we can make to just make it easier and easier for Americans to save earlier and earlier in their careers. Ms. Chambers, I want to turn to you, and I want to thank you very much for your testimony. It's really meaningful. It's really important. I also wanted to talk specifically about the impact that motherhood has on working women and on their capacity to save for retirement. According to a recent Department of Labor report, mothers lose an average of nearly $240,000 in income over their lifetime as a result of the time that they spend caring for their kids. This lost income, in turn, reduces mothers' retirement savings by nearly $60,000. So we obviously have to do more to help moms and to help caregivers so that they can retire with dignity. As I understand it, Ms. Chambers, you have 2 children, is that right? How has your experience been trying to both care for your kids and save for retirement?
So thank you for the question, because it's really important with having children to be able to say, I know when I can leave my career, and I know that I can still provide. When the cost of living goes up, so does babysitting, so does daycare, so does everything else in this world. And until this recent strike, our wages were way behind, right? And on top of that, when school's out or daycare's out, you have to take time off work in order to stay home with your children. Yeah. So any of the 401k that I'm putting into, whether I'm off for a day or 6 weeks with my children, I'm not putting into my 401k daily. Right. On top of that, it's maxed at 40 hours. So if I work 60 hours, I'm only allowed to, or the company only matches up to 40 hours of what I work.
Got it.
If I don't work that 40 hours, I'm already behind.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much for your testimony. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Cassidy.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, thank y'all for being here. I think we share a concern. How do we improve retirement, not for Elon Musk, but for kind of the folks who are the low end? And so, Ms. Ghilarducci, you and, sir, can I ask an indulgence? He just showed up. Can we restart and let me defer to him? Yes. Oh, okay. Never mind. So, but really, the two of you, Ms. Gressler and Ms. Ghilarducci, are saying different things. And so you made the point that it's the lowest portion that's just having the hardest time. But you mentioned, Ms. Gressler, that your statistic, I wrote it down, 50% of those just getting by has decreased by 0.5%, and that income is 123% of pre-retirement income. So can you respond, and then I'm going to ask you to respond.
Yes, I'd love to, because we've heard some widely different statistics here. The difference is looking at survey-based data, which just asks individuals what their income is, versus administrative data, such as IRS tax records, what people have actually reported on their taxes. Economists will tell you that that IRS data is the most accurate for multiple reasons. First of all, you're less accurate to lie on your taxes, but also the way that the survey data is asked. Things like a defined contribution plan that you might not take a regular amount out every month will not show up. And so there's been studies done that showed the median female in retirement looks like she has 45% less income than she actually does based on that survey data when you compare it to the actual IRS tax records. And so you'll see in page 3 of my testimony here, there's a study that is using those IRS panel data and 123% replacement. At the median, 93% replacement. So most people on their tax records appear to have significant income in retirement.
Ms. Gildici, can you briefly respond to that?
Yeah, I don't want to go head-to-head. That study is old. The CPS has been corrected for that. I use a much more comprehensive study from the University of Michigan that looks at what happens when people live their lives after they filed all their taxes, went through their life course, and right on the verge of retirement, how much they have. That's been double-checked with IRS data, with administrative records, and I stand by my written testimony. The bottom half have barely anything. The middle, 200,000. The top have almost $1 million.
And Ms. Gressler, any last word real quickly?
I mean, the data are available on the internet. You can look them up. Federal Reserve.
Mr. Dunham, great talking to your group yesterday. Thank you for your hospitality. Now, you mentioned the defined benefit and how some employers are going back to it. You mentioned IBM, but I think of IBM as having relatively stable employment. But when I look here, it says that the average number of jobs someone holds in the 6-year period from 18 to 24 is 5.7, an average of 4.5 from 25 to 34, and 2.9 from 35 to 44. It does seem like our current job market, people move a lot. And the defined contribution allows you to take that with you as opposed to, wait, I have to vest for 5 years before I qualify, which is what we do in the federal government. If you're not here for 5 years, you don't vest. So that does seem to be a major advantage of a defined contribution as opposed to a defined benefit.
Thank you. And, you know, I think younger workers have always been more prone to move around and switch jobs and sort of find that job.
But this shows even, if you will, kind of in the 30s workers are moving around
Yes.
2.9 times.
Yes. And I also think there's a bit of a chicken and an egg thing, right? Private employers moved away from incentivizing careers, and we see less people having longer careers. In contrast, the public sector has maintained that stable workforce, you know, incentivizing careers. And it's not uncommon to walk into a school and see a teacher who's put in 20 years in that school. So, you know, I think to the extent that there actually are changes, because I think there's always been turnover, you know, the incentives have changed dramatically. And
So in your mind, that if we had a defined benefit, people would be more likely to stay with their job?
You know that.
yes.
Now, I will say that whenever I read of a large number of, like, Meta is laying off a bunch of people, it's often not the worker's choice, it's the employer's choice, just to point that out.
Yes.
Mr. Stevenson, I think Ms. Chambers is kind of pointing out to the anxiety of an investor who's dependent upon her retirement about the kind of the stock market moving up and down. It's one thing if you have a cushion, but it's another in your experience, and it's another if kind of, oh my gosh, I'm 10 years away. You mentioned the terms you use, step up and lock in. Now, I'm guessing that just from what I'm hearing from you, that would be a way to deal with the anxiety of that small investor. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got it exactly right. And again, it's really taking the best of what the pension world had to offer and bringing that into defined contribution plans. And so, yes, we've developed, and a number of my peers have developed solutions that address that issue 100%. And what I love about these is we still know that 60% of Americans don't have an advisor, right? That probably goes without saying. So by what we're describing is making these available inside of 457 plans or 401k plans. You get them at an institutional level, and you get the oversight that comes from a major corporation or a small corporation or an expert managing.
You got to wrap up because he's tapping the thing,
Right.
but I think you
So,
made your point. And
thank
Mr. Chair, can I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record statements from the following groups: the American Benefits Council, the ERISA Industry Committee, the American Council of Life Insurers, the Insured Retirement Institute, IRA, and the American Retirement Association.
Without objection. Senator Casey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the hearing. I wanted to thank, in particular, our witnesses for your testimony and the expertise you bring to the hearing. I don't think there's anyone in this room that doesn't understand the scope of this problem, and especially after the testimony, of how important it is to have enough savings for all of life's needs, no matter where a person lives, no matter what their circumstances. And that, of course, includes retirement. We know that secure, reliable pensions have been phased out by major corporations over time that, in my judgment, are increasingly cutting costs on the backs of workers. And this has contributed to some devastating
data with regard to retirement savings and the gaps therein. Professor Ghilarducci, I wanted to start with you about the findings that you cite in your testimony about, and I want to make sure I have this right, half of Americans nearing retirement, ages 51 to 64, have no wealth in retirement accounts. Is that true?
That is true.
And also that same group, meaning ages 51 to 64, have no home equity. Half don't.
That's true too. And that's because our debt-creating institutions have overwhelmed our wealth-creating institutions for most American workers. Student loans, HELOCs, no down payments for your house, credit card debt, babysitting money, the ability to take money out of your retirement account. That's the account of first resort. It should be the account of no resort until you retire. So our wealth institutions have not worked for most Americans.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to talk to you about a bill that I've introduced to confront part of the problem. It's called the 401 Kids Savings Account Act, to help at least begin to reverse these trends. This bill automatically creates savings accounts at birth for all children in the country, with federal support for low and moderate income families. And then starting when that child reaches the age of 18, funds can be used for higher education, can be used to start a small business or first home or retirement. Starting to save at birth also means families can put the market to work for them, leading to compound savings and greater assets later in life. To illustrate this, in one particular example, the Aspen Institute found that starting savings at birth rather than at age 32, when the typical family starts saving for retirement, results in an additional $473,000 for retirement. So that's what our 401 Kids plan can achieve. I wanted to ask you about that, and also ask Mr. Stevenson or others about the importance of building savings starting at birth.
Yeah, I can quote Einstein, who said the power of compound interest was one of the most powerful forces on earth, and it works the other way. Debt, if you compound debt, and you have debt when you start off, it can compound the other way. So it's a really good plan. We should start with wealth and accumulate it.
Mr. Stevenson?
Senator, what I would add is, we encourage savings at any rate, at any level. What I would add is if we auto-enrolled everyone at age 21 when they graduated from college, we wouldn't have a crisis either. We would make huge progress. Just getting people started at 21 versus 31 captures a vast majority of the number that you quoted.
Mr. Doonan, I know I'm getting close to running out of time, but Mr. Doonan, what's your sense of this in terms of the importance of starting savings at birth?
I think when you look at a retirement system, it's too common to start at age 40. You have this short time frame. You don't have the opportunity for investment returns to support the cost of retirement. So starting earlier obviously makes the math work much better. I think it could help with some equity issues, possibly help relieve some financial pressure, stress, that sort of thing too. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Brunn?
I want to ask Ms. Ghilarducci and Gressler this question. Does it ever make sense to borrow money to consume, to spend? Start over with Ms. Ghilarducci.
Yeah, sure. There's good debt. There's good debt.
I'm saying to spend it, to consume it, as opposed to investing it. There's a big difference there. So go back to that question. Does it ever make sense to borrow money to spend it in the present for something that is other than an investment?
Rarely.
Rarely. What about you?
Only if it's going to produce a positive return over time.
That's an investment.
Like an
you just flipped it to an investment. So I'd like to propose this piece of information. When we came out of World War II, we had the highest debt in the history of our country. But that was the greatest generation. They grew up in the Depression. They fought World War II we somehow ended up paying off all that debt, building the interstate highway system, begs the question, how much of what ails us today, when we even display it through our own federal government, that we're a society that wants to live in the present to where you're not investing for the future. And here, I'll point out, in the institution that wants to be the backstop for some of this stuff we're talking about, it'd be wonderful if we could do it. It was 5 years ago when I got here, we were borrowing $1 trillion a year. Now it's $1 trillion every 6 months. Not to mention, somebody, I think you did earlier, Social Security goes broke in 9 years, Medicare in about 4 or 5. And we don't fix even that. So aren't we kind of missing the main issue that maybe as a country, as a society, we've lost sight of actually what builds for a good future? And my point would be that you need to become savers and investors inherently rather than consumers and spenders, which we become as a society and through government. Ms. Garducci, comment on that, and then Ms. Gressler.
No, I think you got it right. I mean, the government and businesses are really good investors. The government and businesses.
The government is a good investor?
Absolutely. You just told me the highway bill.
That is a tangible project.
Yeah.
Yes. So you got an asset, and I'd agree there. Infrastructure.
Totally. And human capital, big investor in education. That has a rate of return.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. Households.
But have we gone too far on a variety of subjects to be credible as a place that could come in and try to fix the same thing we're talking about that we're abusing here?
I don't buy in on the abuse, but we're together on the borrowing you do as a government should be an investment. Absolutely.
Okay.
I would disagree that the government is a good investor. I don't think it is, and it would be wonderful to talk about having children be able to start retiring at day one, but we have the exact opposite. As you pointed out, debt is the reverse of compound interest. So we have children being born, and already they're immediately burdened with $100,000 or more in debt that they are going to have to pay off in the future. And so the best thing that policymakers can do to create a brighter future for every generation is to not burden them with that debt.
Agree 100%. And I think it's kind of sanctimonious to be talking about it from here when we would be the greatest example that has kind of abused the whole equation of not trying to borrow money to live in the present. It's always a bad business plan. Ms. Gressler, we've got a situation back in Indiana. There's actually an act called the Susan Muffley Act, which was an example of back when government did step in, it picked winners and losers. And again, this had to do with an automotive industry to where certain folks got bailed out, some didn't. It begs the question, too, of when we do step in, can we be in the business of picking winners and losers? And even if we do want to do that, are we financially in a position to pick any winner or loser in our current shape?
No, I think this is a perfect example of how when we do have these systems that are broken and the government steps in and bails out some and not others, that's absolutely unfair. And so the situation with the Delphi workers, those who were unionized got bailed out. They got $1 billion as a package of what was at least $17 billion bailout for the UAW and the Big Three, without which older workers' pensions would not be there today. And so now we have a situation, unionized, you got $1 billion, same company, non-unionized, they've gotten nothing. 90% of the workforce is not unionized.
Well, thank you. My time is up. I'll part with this statement. Never borrow money to consume it. Get good at investing. Your future will be better off, and I wouldn't count on this place fixing it until we get our own house in order.
Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the witnesses. We do things all the time that benefit some people and not others. I mean, the notion that doing good for some people is not a good thing to do because you didn't do it good for everybody. Every program that we work on usually has some target audience, and then it may not benefit other people, and then we figure out other programs to benefit them. So the notion that we helped people preserve pensions, but it was a bad idea because we didn't help everybody preserve a pension. The American Rescue Plan, we acted as part of that, and it passed by one vote in the Senate, one vote, and protected the pensions of 2 million workers. That followed up an earlier vote that we did to protect the pension of United Mine workers, and that number was smaller, but that's a good thing. By protecting those pensions, we actually protect others' pensions as well, because it's less likely that those 2 million, the failure of those pension plans would draw down the funding levels of the PBGC, and so others who had pensions that weren't necessarily protected are going to end up more protected as well. So, Mr. Chair, I know you probably felt the same way. There can be a lot of frustrating days around here, but there have been 3 times when I've been here where something's happened by one vote. Saving the Affordable Care Act happened by one vote. The American Rescue Plan, 2 million workers' pensions, happened by one vote. The Inflation Reduction Act, cutting prescription drug costs and advancing a clean energy economy, happened by one vote. There's some days where you wonder why you're here. On the days where something happens by one vote, you think, wow, I'm really glad that I decided to seek office and be in this place. Because sometimes it's just about one person standing up. A couple of items I want to emphasize, and these are some items I'm working on with Senator Cassidy. First is auto re-enrollment. We have a bill, the auto re-enroll bill, that would periodically sweep people in and have them enroll in their company's plans and give them the ability to opt out. It's similar to what we do with health insurance. We're always kind of every year jogging you about health insurance and kind of making you think, do you have the right plan or do you want to switch? If we could do that more often, on the retirement options that our employees have with employers, I think it would be a great thing, and I think it's a bipartisan proposal that I would like us to do. The second one I want to focus on is young workers. This statistic kind of surprised me. 2.7 million Americans between the ages of 18 and 20 work full-time hours, 2.7 million Americans. But 40% of workplace retirement plans set a minimum age threshold of 21 to be able to participate in retirement plans. We ought to change that to 18. We ought to have workplace retirement plans pick up 18, 19, and 20-year-olds that are working and include them in retirement as well. The Helping Young Americans Save for Retirement Act is something that Senator Cassidy and I are also working on, and I think, again, it's non-controversial and bipartisan. And then the last thing I'll just say, and I'm one of these people that's trying to do 4 hearings today, so I'm going to defer some time back. Employee stock ownership. If you want to talk about retirement security, the 10 million Americans that work at ESOPs end up with some powerful retirement security, And ESOPs predominate in some unusual industries. For some reason, the construction and kind of contracting industry has been, but increasingly you see it in retail. Increasingly, you see it in some hospitality industries. And if we can continue to promote ESOPs through our tax code or through other strategies, I think that is an element in retirement security that can be really, really helpful for American workers. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Budd.
Thank you, Chairman. So Congress has provided explicit instructions to the Department of Labor on numerous occasions about how to encourage Americans to save for their retirement. However, the DOL's current fiduciary rule proposal directly contradicts these directives. If implemented, it will further restrict access, increase costs to consumers, limit personalized financial advice, and only allow consideration of very basic investment products. So this approach towards retirement investors is incompatible with the current system where individual retirement savers are able to make decisions for themselves. Mr. Stevenson, do you believe DOL's proposal is counterproductive to the great bipartisan work in the Secure Act and Secure Act 2.0?
It's a great question. And one of the things that we sort of talked around today is financial literacy, right? More education, more training. In general, we know that financial literacy doesn't work. We've all done tons of programs, and so that's why auto enroll, auto escalate, all those things are so powerful. As it relates to the DOL piece, it is such a broad, sweeping piece of legislation or proposal. It will take our eye off the ball for a long time on our ability to implement all that you've done around Secure Act 1.0 and 2.0. It will stop a lot of the things that we're working on that are so positive, that are so bipartisan, and it is a major distraction, and it's a major expense that those expenses will flow to places that we won't like.
Sounds like a bad idea. Mr. Stevenson, would you agree with the sentiment that in a time when folks are living longer, inflation is rampant, and there's a need to start saving more and saving earlier for retirement, that this rule would leave people worse off?
It certainly has the potential. There's some challenging parts to it, and again, I would just stay to the point around. There's so much power that we created in Secure Act 2.0 and expanding access, making it easier for small business to do those things that we want them to do. Young savers, student loan matching, if we implement those things, we're going to make a huge dent in the challenges we've all talked about today, and that rule will really put that at risk for a few years.
So let's talk for a minute, Mr. Stevenson, about issues that will help my constituents and folks across the country with retirement instead of hurting them, as this rule is likely to do. Secure 2.0, it had several incentives to help small businesses cover startup costs associated with employment retirement plans. While these bipartisan measures were important, a simple miscalculation means that the tax credit doesn't work for the smallest of businesses out there. So I'm working with Senator Hassan to introduce the Senate companion to the bipartisan RISE Act. And what this bill does, it addresses that miscalculation to help offset the smallest businesses and allows them to offer retirement plans to their employees. So do you have a positive outlook on whether tax credits like these will actually help boost retirement savings for people?
They absolutely will.
Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, it's just so many Americans work in small companies, and everything that we can do to remove the barrier from a business owner to launching their own 401k plan and making that available to all their employees is going to be helpful. We've proven that time and time again, especially with the other features around auto-enroll, auto-escalate. That's the pattern, right? Make it easy for the business to set it up, and then make it easy for the employee to participate.
It's very helpful. Thank you. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Senator Budd. All right, I think that's about it. I think on behalf of the whole committee, I want to thank all of the panelists. I think we may have strong disagreements about solutions, but we can all agree this is a serious problem, needs discussion, and I think we've begun that today. So let me thank everybody for being here. That is the end of our hearing today. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions for the record will be due in 10 business days, March 13th, 5 p.m. Finally, I ask unanimous consent to enter at the record 10 statements from stakeholders outlining their pension and retirement priorities. So ordered. The committee stands adjourned. Thank you all very much.